Hey everyone, Chris Stoltz coming at you once again from the MuppetStuff Museum. And today I have a very special guest, my friend Chris O'Connor from the UK, who will be talking to us about his recent traveling adventures to the Great Con-Junction out in LA. Well, I'm going to talk to him about my recent adventures to the Great D23 Muppet Christmas Carol 30th anniversary celebration in New York, which was held the same weekend. All right, and without further ado, here is Chris O'Connor. So we have Chris and Chris. I made sure I put my last name there so they wouldn't get us confused, because otherwise
I didn't do that.
Two Chris's having a conversation, and I think it's going to get crazy. So we were just talking backstage real quickly. I should tell everybody that the two of us have been virtual friends for what, like a decade or so?
If not more.
If not more. Probably from the Muppet Central days, I think,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's pushing almost 20 years, I think.
I joined there in, I think it was 98. I joined there.
98. Yeah, it's let's don't age ourselves too much here.
No, okay. It was 5 years ago.
So yeah, it's certainly been a while that we've known each other, but this is literally the first time we've had a conversation live like this, back and forth. Usually it's just through text or through social media or something. So this is a treat for both of us. It's a first all around. I'm sure everyone can see. I have my little corner of Muppet stuff. Chris has his corner of Muppet stuff. I love your beaker back there, by the way. That's a custom made beaker, right?
Yeah, it's custom made.
That's amazing. I love him. He's freaking out. I love it. All right, so the reason we're here to talk about the Henson events we attended. So you attended the Great Con-Junction out in LA, right?
In LA, yeah.
And I was at the Muppet Christmas Carol 30th anniversary event put out by D23 in Queens, New York at the Museum of the Moving Image. And both were the same weekend, which was kind of bizarre that they had two events on both coasts celebrating two separate Muppet/Henson anniversaries. And I didn't go that far. I mean, New York is only about an hour and a half from my house. You, my friend, traveled a great distance to be at the Great Con-Junction.
Yeah, it was 11 hours flight from London, but we kind of turned it into a week's holiday as well. So it was worth it. LA had always been on the list of places to go. So when this opportunity came up, I was like, I've got to do this. The thought of not doing it and then going to LA another time and just like seeing the Henson studios and stuff outside and not being able to go in, I was just like, nah, I'm doing this. But I only went to New York in March, so it was back to the States fairly soon. Not really what was planned, but it's done, and it was absolutely amazing, and I'm so glad I did it.
I had these opposite, thought process, but the opposite planning process, because I really wanted to go. This is the second time this convention has gone on. The Thames Con puts this on, and they did the first Great Con-Junction back in, I think it was March of 2020, before the world changed forever.
Yeah.
Just literally like right before everything shut down, they had just wrapped this thing up. And I was thinking the same thing. Well, I really should go to England. I've not been there before. And that is really the time to go, because all the performers are going to be there, and you can kind of see, where all these things were filmed. It's all right there. And then for whatever reason, I'm like, but it's, I don't know if I want to do this. I was hearing ththis rumors about this virus. I'm like, do I really want to go out and be out in another country in case this thing gets really bad? All this stuff. So I didn't go. And then literally like 2 weeks later, it's like, oh, there's no more flights. No one's going anywhere. Be in your house. Don't talk to anybody, and don't touch anything. So now it's still an issue. It's still concerned somewhat, but thankfully it's not as big of a deal as it has been in the past. So live events are back. You made the trip much longer than my hour and a half or so trip. And all right, so tell me about the Great Con-Junction in LA. It looked fantastic from what you had told me about and what I saw online.
So it was a 2-day event. So it was Saturday and Sunday, and you had various levels of tickets. You could just buy a ticket to go to the event on Saturday, or to go on Sunday, or to go to both. But there was also the party at the Jim Henson lot in Hollywood, which was included with the weekend tickets and various other ticket tiers. And there was also the opportunity to go to Jim Henson's Creature Shop. Now, as much of a fan as I am, I didn't actually realize that the Creature Shop wasn't at the Jim Henson Company lot. It's in a completely different area. I think it was like 10, 12 miles away. So that was interesting to see. The event.
I'm sorry, I don't want to.
No, go for it.
A small part of the Creature Shop on the Henson lot, just for light puppet building, a couple things, and the big Creature Shop where they do like the extra technical large creatures, that kind of stuff. That's what you're talking. That's what's off that down the street. I've not been there either. I was an intern at the Henson Company, so I got to see, I got to be on the lot daily for a few months. I got to sneak into the Henson recording studio and see where they keep archives of stuff. All that kind of great stuff. But I have never actually been to the Creature Shop, so that's a whole other experience. So please elaborate on that.
Yeah, so that was on Sunday morning. We had to be there. They did 2 tours, so one was at 9 o'clock, one was at 10 o'clock. I did to 10 o'clock. Followed the directions with the sat nav. It was literally like an industrial unit. There was nothing to say it was a Henson thing at all. It was just like a corrugated iron building, and the group of people were gathered outside, and we got to go in just after 10, and we had to leave our mobile phones as soon as we got in. So there was no photograph. There was a couple of areas that you could do some photos, but the actual workshop, you weren't allowed to take any. We went into a large room with a big table, like a conference table, and all around the room was loads and loads of different puppets and characters from lots of different productions over the years. So there was Earl Sinclair and Baby from obviously Dinosaurs. They had 3 of the characters from a UK show, which I think was called Monsters in the Family. They had some Star Wars stuff. They had a wooden carved Jim Henson bust. They had lots of images around the place. So they had like a labyrinth poster, and I just happened to spot on the floor Rugby Tiger from A Christmas Toy. And that kind of made it for me, because I've been watching A Christmas Toy since it first aired, and he was really small. I was expecting him to be quite big, and he was literally like this. So I was down on the floor getting my photo taken with him.
Rugby Tiger, definitely a underrepresented character.
Yeah,
in the Henson pantheon, right? I mean, Christmas Toy gets, gets its fill here. There's there's Emmett Otter, and then by the way, there's the Christmas Toy, which is always quite funny, because being Henson fans for all these years, when I watched the Christmas Toy when it first premiered in the mid '80s, and then seeing Toy Story, the much more famous movie that Pixar made, I could not but help notice the similarity.
Yeah.
They're like,
toys that come to life when people leave a room.
Yeah, I'm like, did I?
Yeah.
There's a couple of things that they changed around, but for the most part, Pixar's pretty much known for their originality, and they really took some liberties. I almost think we should have based on the Jim Henson classic, A Christmas Toy. At the event I was at, the Museum of the Moving Image, they have Mew. You talk about how small Rugby Tiger is. So Mew is this big, and he's hidden in the bottom of this whole cabinet where they have a whole bunch of various puppets from Musicians of Bremen and Fraggle Rock, and all kinds of different things are mixed in there. And then you look real small, oh, there's Mew.
So after seeing the characters and Rugby Tiger on the floor, we were presented with a sort of pitch reel with the work that the Creature Shop has done. It showed lots of familiar characters that we all knew, but some that we didn't know. One of the things that stood out for me, and I think stood out for a lot of fans, was kind of like an animated, film or series with a witch, and it was really funny, and the character was really great. They actually had a puppet version of a witch in the same room, but the actual bit on the screen was like an animation. They did tell us a little bit about it, but I think it was one of those things, they actually said it was quite old and it never unfortunately got produced. which was a shame because it did look really good. After we went through doors and we were then into the creature shop, so we had to leave our mobile phones. We couldn't take them because we weren't allowed to photograph or video anything. And as we went through the doors, we were met by all the puppets from Puppet Up, which were all in a big stand with all the puppet stands on it. And then we went round to the left, and there was workbenches, there was big rolls of fur, there was foam. There were various maquettes all around the workshop. One of the ones that stood out to me was the Gorgs from Fraggle Rock. So they were probably this sort of size, and they had Junior Gorg, and then there were two of Pa, and they were Pa sat in a throne. So I asked what they were for, and for the new Fraggle Rock series, they were going to have Pa always sat in a throne and not actually walking around, which was abandoned later on. But that was quite an interesting idea, and it was great to see these maquettes. And then opposite that, in a box on the floor, were doozer bodies. So latex doozers, and they said that they get sent away to somebody that heat the seam because the latex is done as two halves. So her job is to heat the seam so that when it's flocked, you can't see where the seam was. And then behind that was another box of doozers like this big, and that was the babies that are used when they've got the children in Fraggle Rock. So that was great to see as well. They had the Skeksis prototype for the Age of Resistance, which they used when they were trying to sell the series to Netflix. That was sort of up high with some other characters, and they had a mechanical, like a Waldo type thing, where you and all of us were allowed to have a go doing the levers, and it was basically just like a long stem, like a worm, but the way it moved by doing these cables was absolutely amazing. And there were various other productions around, and then we went into the studio of Robert Bennett, the guy that won the Creature Shop Challenge. He had his whole office where he does all his carving, and because on the Creature Shop Challenge he had made a Skeksis head, so he was very heavily involved in the Age of Resistance and creating all the new characters for that. We then left that room and went through to an area which had loads of artwork on the walls. So there was lots of designs for costumes and puppets and productions, and there was sketches for the Monster Ball for the Lady Gaga tour, which Henson created the creatures for. So it was just like this huge library right away across all these walls of all these various productions. So yeah, just absolutely amazing and just brilliant to see. So yeah, that was really good.
I mean, you were talking about that witch production. It reminded me of this: how many productions the Henson Company not only has worked on, right, that we have been able to see, but how many things they've announced or got into some sort of pre-production phase on, and then it never came to be for whatever reason. So you think like, wow, look at all the stuff that they did, but look at all the stuff that hasn't even come to be yet, and they use that stuff as like a learning tool, for to build other things or to make stories better, or, better connections at different networks, whatever the case may be of why the things ultimately didn't happen. But the productions you listed off there, just in the span of like a room, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the Monsters in My Family. I don't think I've ever seen that. I know it's a UK show, so a lot of people probably are not that familiar with that. But I have seen the characters. Like there's like a big red kind of
big red one, and then there's a green one. Yeah.
Yeah. That, like, you see those things in person. I remember Muppet Fest, and at that they had a small museum set up where they had poser Muppets. They had Kermit, Fozzie, Miss Piggy, Statler and Waldorf, and Rizzo, and Kermit from Muppet Treasure Island. But they also would bring out Creature Shop puppets for the panels, and they had the evil cat from Cats versus Dogs, and they would show how they would manipulate that. Just amazing stuff. So like, I can only imagine when you're sitting in that room and you see like the scale, because the scale of the Muppets is, here. You're talking about you walk in this room and there's life size, if not like larger than life size creatures. Just and some of these things you've grown up with your whole life, like, holy moly, there's a Gorg. There's a Doozer, that's mind blowing.
Yeah.
And I'm sure part of the reason why they didn't want you filming in there and photoing is because there's probably some IP, some new production. There's probably something in there that they're working on that like hasn't been released yet. Like, oh, we can't show that off yet. we don't have the clearances,
Yeah,
and whatever else.
they had I think there's probably 3 different workbenches that had things on it which were literally just covered over with a sheet, and we weren't allowed to see. So yeah, definitely something going on there.
Don't even look under there. Nothing for you to see. Don't worry about it. And then like 6 months from now, they'd be like, "Oh, we're working on this show." You're like,
yeah,
I was
that
2
was under
feet
the
from
sheet.
that thing.
Yeah.
That shape looks familiar. I think I saw a ghost that looked like that one.
So the convention was kind of over 2 floors in the Hilton Universal City Hotel.
Which has significance because Universal Pictures originally distributed the movie, right?
Yeah.
So that's, I think, why they maybe had it there. I know Thames kind of likes to have these things in a significant place that means something to the production itself. So I think that's why it was like extra special to have it at the Universal Hilton, because Universal Pictures distributed the movie.
There was a museum set up in one of the rooms upstairs where it had the Chamberlain, and it had Hupp and Deet and loads of costumes, and there was lots of the maquettes. So they had like the Augra maquette there, lots of Podling maquettes. There was the original costumes from the Dark Crystal, which were created and Cheryl Henson modelled back in the 80s, which was kind of like a fashion line, which didn't come to much. But I know it's featured in Dark Crystal books and stuff. Probably about 8 of those costumes.
The plan was to sell them at like Bloomingdale's or something, like some kind of like more higher end retail stores. It's like, wow, you could have been walking down Fifth Avenue in New York and seen a Gelfling. I mean, how cool would that have been?
Yeah. One of the items that they had on display was Jim Henson's waistcoat, and it was based on Jen's waistcoat, and Cheryl was wearing one of the waistcoats as well, but Jim Henson's original one was on display. None of this was behind glass. It was just all like, there was pillars with like tape along. There was signs saying don't touch and stuff, and it was far enough back, but it was just really nice to be able to see these things without the glass in front of them like you do at the museums.
You really get a nice sense of the texture because you don't have that barrier there.
Yeah. And they also had the Wall of Destiny from the original film, which was on display. So again, you could stand literally right next to it and just see it all. And there's still a question about the guy with the beard that had the wings, when it's only usually the female Gelfling that have wings. And I know that came up a few times over the weekend. So that's why they're saying they need Age of Resistance 2, so that can be explored, so we can find out who that was and why there's a bearded Gelfling with wings.
That was in Age of Resistance? There was a bearded Gelfling, or in the original Dark Crystal?
In the original Dark Crystal, so in the wall.
Oh, in the
Wall of Destiny.
Wall. Okay.
Yeah.
As many times as I see the Dark Crystal, I'm gonna have to like rewatch it for the millionth time, and just look at that specific scene and just look at the Wall of Destiny, because I don't remember noticing that the male Gelfling also had wings. I really wish the Henson Company would get into like build their own streaming deal. Like, instead of being this is over at Apple and this is over at Netflix and this is at Disney, like, here, like, let's make a deal for the whole kit and caboodle, not to buy the company, but just to have the rights to everything. So you would have like, on Disney Plus, as an example, you would just have, instead of Marvel, Star Wars, National Geographic, Jim Henson, and everything that the Henson Company worked on. Maybe you could even cross it with the Muppets a little bit, like Disney stuff, and just have every show that they ever worked on could just be boom in there. That's what they need to really generate some love for that, for the company and these projects, because the audience just gets delineated and shifted because this person doesn't have Apple to watch New Fraggle Rock, and this person doesn't have Netflix to watch like this stuff. The reason I don't consider myself a Muppet collector as much. I consider myself a Henson collector, and that's because the Muppets are fantastic, and believe me, they're my main love of Henson, and they're the main focus of the collection and everything. But the intricacies, the technological advances, the puppetry, the art, all those other things, that's not necessarily from the Muppets itself. That's the Jim Henson Company as a whole, and the other productions and things like that, especially the Dark Crystal, that have blown up and become afterwards. So that's you really need the whole thing to really appreciate what they were able to do with the technology involved. Because now it's like, oh, it's so easy with CGI to like, oh, we want to have this monster. It's 40 feet tall and it's got blah blah. Okay, great, done. Well, back then, like you look at the Greek myths and the Storyteller and the Monster Maker special, like you look at all those shows, they physically made these things and they had to figure out a way to make them look bigger. Or sometimes, like Monster Maker, they actually made a 60-foot character or whatever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's really what makes my love of Henson and the Muppets, complete. So I'd really love to see something where they had the UK shows, Ghost of Fafter Hall, which has its moments of brilliance and not so much brilliance.
Yeah.
But like all those things to bring them together. I mean, if the Henson Company could get a deal with Disney Plus to bring, Age of Resistance and a separate series, that would be awesome. Because I think that the fact that it didn't do that well on Netflix is a testament to Netflix's strange way of marketing things. They like push it real early, like, oh, there's magazines and some print ads and maybe a billboard or two, and then it's nothing. And having celebrities voice the characters was a great idea, but use that celebrity to push the show. You have Anya Taylor-Joy, who's like the #1 Hollywood it girl, as the voice of Briar. She's on these talk shows, doing all these other movies. Get her on there and say, hey, watch this show.
Yeah. I think it's interesting what you said about being a Muppet fan like I am, and my main collection is Muppets. Second to that is Fraggle Rock, but then it's all linked to the whole Henson Empire, so there is naturally an interest in Labyrinth and Dark Crystal and all the other things that they do, and I kind of picked up on that quite a lot at the convention. There were a lot of fans of Dark Crystal only, but there were also a lot of fans that I spoke to that had pretty much sort of had exactly the same story as me, sort of born in the 70s, grew up with the Muppet Show, then there was the reruns of the Muppet Show, and then Fraggle Rock and Sesame Street, and a lot of people were sort of in the same situation. And then Dark Crystal maybe came later. I think for me it was, I don't know, probably in the mid-80s when it was shown on BBC Two in the UK, and that was probably the first time I ever seen it. So it's, everyone said the same. It's how those things in childhood just seem to latch on to something, and it just resonates with a time that you can't, like a lot of people, you don't forget your childhood, and those characters were such a big part of it.
Well, and the thing about the Muppets and the Henson characters that separates, some people, I'm sure some people, when you say you're a Muppet collector, that aren't quite, they like the Muppets, they enjoyed the movies, they're not like fans, let's say. It's like casual viewers. When you say you collect the Muppets or you're a big Henson fan, they're like, oh, you're into like kiddie stuff. You like the Muppet Babies, or you're into Sesame Street. Like that's kiddie stuff. Why, you're an adult? Like, grow up.
Yeah.
But the difference between the Henson characters and say like Howdy Doody or like some other kind of shows that were just for kids that didn't really kind of grow is that the humor and the heart and the storytelling is so much better. So like when you watch the Muppet Show as a kid, you're like, oh, this is zany and funny. The characters are bright and colorful and all this stuff. And then you watch it 10 years later, 15 years later, whatever it is, as an adult, and you really get to see a whole other part of the show.
Yeah.
There's so much more humor. Like, oh, I didn't get that joke before. That's like a literary joke. I didn't like, no one's going to know that when you're 5 years old or whatever. Right? So, I mean, there's just so much extra going on there that really propels the Henson universe from just being kiddie stuff to like, there's a whole lot. So I think that's what needs to be explored, and like like if the stuff was more readily available, people would see like there's a whole world out there. Like I would love to see more Labyrinth stuff, like a mini series or something set in the world of Labyrinth where you see those characters and their interactions, like maybe an anthology show, so you have a little bit of Sardidimus, all these other characters. What did Ludo do, right? Who did he piss off? To get caught up in that, like there's a whole episode of something right there, right?
They've got such a short bit in the film, but that character could just have its whole world, or it's got its own story.
Right.
So there were just saying about that, about Labyrinth having like a series or something, there were 2 nuggets that came out of a convention. So there was a panel with the producers, which included Lisa Henson, and there was also a panel with Lisa, Cheryl, and Heather. And one of the things that they spoke about was that Lisa Henson is working on or looking into Labyrinth 2. So I know we've kind of been here before and this has been mentioned before, but it was great to hear that it's still in the works and maybe this time it might come off. And the other thing that was mentioned quite a lot through the weekend was Fraggle Rock Series 2 is being filmed in Canada.
That's awesome. I mean, this is a sad state of affairs, but this is the first Henson series in, besides like their preschool series, that has gotten a second season in a long time.
Yeah.
Unfortunately to say, but this is good news. Yeah. So, and you said the Labyrinth too. That's been a rumor for what, 15 years or something. It kind of it's like the Fraggle Rock movie. It like kept popping up and like, oh, it's happening. What's happening? And 5 years later, oh, it's still happening. 5 years later, it's still happening. And then it's like, oh no, now it's a TV show. Fine, as long as something is happening, I'm not going to belittle it. But yeah, Labyrinth too. Of course, I have no idea what the plot of that is yet, but just speculating, it'd be kind of cool if Sarah gets old and it's her daughter that goes through and has to deal with it. She's got to save her own daughter. You know, something else has to happen.
Yeah.
Where, you know, she gets in there and then she's like, oh, I got to do this again, and she enlists her friends to help her because the daughter maybe doesn't know who these characters are or whatever. So, I mean, there's so much potential there. Again, each character could have its own separate whole backstory. Yeah. And there's a lot going on.
Thanks a lot.